I carried $1 million into the Alaskan wilderness to buy back 10 lives. By sunrise, the money was gone. 7 people had vanished, 2 were dead, and my dog had taken the bullet meant for me. I have never told this the whole way through, not to the review board, not to the reporters who camped outside my truck for a week, not to the counselor the Forest Service made me see, who kept asking how the experience made me feel, as if there were a word for it you could write on a form. I am telling it now because I am old enough to know that some things do not heal. They just go quiet, and this one has been quiet a long time, the way a river goes quiet under ice, still moving underneath, still dark, still able to pull you down if you step wrong. My name is Nathan Ward. I spent most of my working life as a ranger in the interior of Alaska, in country most people will never see and would not want to. Black spruce so thick you can lose a man 20 feet ahead of you, muskeg that swallows boots, rivers that run gray with glacier flower and never warm. Not in July, not ever. I worked search and rescue for a long time. I found people. I found what was left of people. I got good at reading the ground and the light and the way a forest holds its breath when something is wrong, and I learned my own limits the hard way. Years before any of this, in a winter storm, when a man named Eddie Larson went off a marked trail in a whiteout, and I did not reach him in time. I found him the next morning sitting up against a tree with his hands in his lap, calm as a man waiting for a bus. He had taken his gloves off near the end. People do that. The cold makes them feel like they are burning, so they undress. He was 40 feet from a cabin he never saw. I have carried Eddie every day since, not as a story I tell, as a weight. It changed something in me that never changed back, and it left me a man who could not sit still while someone was out there calling. That is not bravery. Bravery is a choice. What I had was a wound that pointed one direction, and the direction was always toward the sound of someone begging. That is how they got me. In the end, that is exactly how they got me. The other thing that came out of that grief was Rook. He was a shepherd, mostly with something bigger mixed in, dark across the back, gray coming into his muzzle by the time all of this happened. I inherited him half-grown from a handler who died. Another thing I carried. Rook and I found each other in grief and we stayed together out of it. My marriage had ended years before, quietly, the way things end when one person keeps going into the woods after the dead. By then there was the job and the country and Rook was the part that loved me back. You will need to know more about him before this is over, and I will tell you when the night makes it matter. For now, know 2 things. He was the last of my family, and in 6 years of working beside me, I never once saw him do a thing that did not have a reason. One more thing before I start, and I want it on the record even though I did not believe it then. The old-timers in that country, the trappers, the ones who had wintered out past the last road, used to say there were things in those trees that took people the outlaws never touched. Things that were there before the outlaws and would be there after. I filed it with the rest of the bar talk. I do not file it there anymore. Let me go back to the beginning, to the part I did not see, the part I pieced together later from the ones who lived, and from the things the forest gave back. It started with a guide named Cole Barrett, and 10 people who paid good money to be somewhere beautiful. Cole was one of the best backcountry guides in that part of the state. A quiet man, steady hands, the kind who does not talk much, who watches the sky and the water and knows a day before you do that the weather is going to turn. Clients loved him because he made them feel safe without ever bragging, and because he brought people home. That was his reputation. He brought people home. He had a past. I did not know that then. Almost nobody did. But he carried something too, the way I carried Eddie. And his was heavier and it had teeth. The group was 10. I have their names memorized now the way you memorize a prayer you no longer believe, out of a duty that has outlived its reason. But I am not going to hand you a list. The night I want to show you is their second one out. At a fire in a stand of spruce above a gray river, because everything you need to know about all 10 of them was sitting around that fire, and I have come to feel I was there, sitting just outside the light, watching 10 people be alive for the last easy night any of them would have. I know that evening because Mara told me. Mara Quinn, a travel writer, the real kind, the kind who had actually been to hard places and come back with more than photographs. She had trained years before as an EMT and never quite let it go, So she carried a small kit and a certain calm you only get from having had your hands inside an emergency and not panicking. She was strong without performing it. When things went bad, and they went bad in ways none of them could have imagined, she did not become a hero out of a movie. She became something rarer. She stayed useful. She stayed human. She was the only one of the 10 who walked out of that forest. They had flown in by float plane that morning, to a lake with no name on the tourist maps, and the plane left, and the silence closed over them the way it does out there, complete and enormous. The first day was beautiful. That is the cruel part. It is always beautiful first. They crossed a river running gray and fast off the glaciers, and Cole rigged a line and brought them over one at a time. They saw ravens working a ridgeline and a bull moose in the willows, and mountains standing blue and far to the north with snow on them even in summer. And that night, Cole built the fire low and neat, the way he built everything. And for a little while the cold pulled back and it was only people in light, and the enormous dark leaning in around them. There was Gus Holt, 63, a retired pipeline welder from Fairbanks who had wanted this trip for 30 years and finally had the knees to try. Loud, kind, generous. He carried peppermints in his coat and handed them out to everyone like a grandfather. Hold on to the peppermints. God help me, hold on to them. There was Theo Lane, 24, the youngest, an art student from Portland who had never been anywhere colder than a refrigerated aisle, and had signed up on a dare from a girlfriend who then did not come. He was gentle and unsure, and he laughed too loud when he was nervous, which was most of the time. Wes Caldwell sat a little apart, like always. He barely spoke to the adults. But Mara noticed that every time the group stopped, at the river on the climb, and again now by the fire, Wes would take out a small recorder, hold it close and murmur into it, and his whole face would change. The stiffness would go out of it. She heard him once, low, "Hi, baby. Daddy saw a moose today. A real one. Big as the truck. I'm going to show you a picture." He was recording messages for his daughter. He could not talk to grown strangers. But he could talk to a little girl who was not there, and when he did, his voice went warm as a lamp. June Hart had a plastic freezer bag of folded paper. Letters, Mara realized. Dozens of them in the round, careful printing of children. June taught 3rd grade, and her students had written her letters for the trip, and she carried them in that bag against the wet. Later, when the whistling started in the dark and the fear came, Mara would see her unfold one and read it by headlamp, moving her lips the way another person might pray. Lena Park walked the edge of the firelight naming things, because naming things was how she loved the world. A graduate student in ecology, she knew more about the plants than Cole did and said so kindly, the way some people offer facts instead of affection. She crouched by a low plant with round leaves and told Theo its name and what it was good for. And Theo, who was a little in love with all of them by then out of pure loneliness, asked her if the forest was as friendly as it looked. And Lena said no. She said, "The forest isn't cruel. It's just indifferent." She said it kindly, the way she said everything, and everyone laughed a little, and no one understood yet that she had just told them the truest thing anyone would say on that whole trip. Dana and Ben Frost, married. 30s, bickered by the fire about whose fault it was that the good stove fuel was in the wrong pack. It went back and forth, sharp and familiar. And then Mara watched Ben without a word, without even looking at Dana, take off his own warmer gloves and set them on his wife's knee, because her hands were blue, and go right on arguing with her while she put them on. That was the whole marriage right there. The words were the argument. The gloves were the truth. Paul Brody, an engineer, sat very still and very upright, with the careful posture of a man pretending nothing hurt. And Mara, who was trained to see pain in people, saw that Paul's hip was bad, worse than bad, and that he was hiding it, shifting weight in tiny movements, taking the long, careful route around the fire, so no one would watch him limp. When she asked if he was all right, he smiled and said he was tired, that was all. And she let him have the lie, because she understood he would rather hurt in private than be the man who ruined the trip everyone had paid for. And there was Owen Price. Remember that name. Everyone else in this story earned my grief. Owen earned something else, and I will get to it. Owen was helpful. Too helpful. He gathered firewood no one asked for and filled water no one requested and stayed close to Cole. And it read that first night, as the eagerness of a nervous man wanting to be liked. It read differently later. He asked Cole by the fire whether the north trail would be the faster way out if the weather turned. Mara heard it. She heard it because it was strange even then, a small wrong note, and she was the kind of person who noticed wrong notes and filed them away without knowing why. Cole had not mentioned a north trail. Cole had not mentioned any trail by name. There were a dozen ways through that country, and Cole kept the route in his own head the way good guides do. And here was a tourist from the city asking specifically about the North Trail, as if he already had a map in his mind that Cole had not given him. Cole answered flat. They would go the way he chose, when he chose it, and he looked at Owen a beat longer than the question deserved. And then he looked at his fire. Mara saw one more thing that night, and she did not understand it until it was far too late to save anyone. When Cole took out his map to check the next day's ground, folding it small against the wind, Owen watched it. Not the way a tourist watches a map with the vague interest of a passenger. He watched it the way you watch something you are memorizing. He watched Cole's finger and the fold lines and the marks, and his eyes moved along the paper. And when Cole folded it away, Owen looked at the fire like a man who had gotten what he came for. Mara told herself she was tired and inventing things. She was a writer. She noticed too much. That is what she told herself. She was not inventing things. She was the only one of them who saw it happening, and she did not have the word for it yet. And by the time she did, the word was already too late. The black spruce closed in as they climbed the next morning. That country is old logging ground in places, cut a century ago and never fully recovered. So you get these scars, these long straight ghosts of roads under the moss, and clearings that grew back wrong, and here and there the bones of things men built and abandoned, a rusted cable, a collapsed shack, a stove sitting in the middle of nowhere with a spruce growing up through the burner. It gets into you, that country, not as fear at first, as scale. You feel how small the human rules are out there. Property, law, decency, help. They are agreements we make in warm rooms, and the forest never signed any of them. Cole felt it too. But for him it was memory, and memory is worse than scale. The warning signs started coming faster, and they were the kind you only understand later, when it is too late to matter. There were marks on the birch trees, not blazes, not the honest cuts a trail crew makes. These were small and deliberate. 3 short strokes in a curve cut deep and old and recut recently, so the fresh wood showed pale. Lena noticed them and thought they were a survey code. Cole saw them and went still for a second, just a second, and then said they were nothing, and moved the group on faster than before. They walked into a stretch where the birds went silent. If you have never been in a living forest when it stops, I cannot fully describe it. A forest is never truly quiet, and there is always something. Wind, water, a squirrel, a distant jay, and then there is a place where all of that just ends, a pocket of nothing, and your body knows before your mind does that a predator has been through or is near, and everything with wings has decided to be somewhere else. In the middle of that silence, they walked into a burned campsite, old fire, years old. The ground still bare and black in a ring, melted plastic fused into a lump you could not name anymore, a tent frame collapsed and rusted, and in the ashes half sunk a child's shoe. Small, pink once, gray now. Laces still tied, nobody spoke. Cole told them to keep moving and not to touch anything, and there was something in his voice that made even Gus obey without a joke. I would find that same campsite days later, in the dark, with Rook, and I would understand what Cole already knew. That place was not a tragedy. It was a message. It had been left standing on purpose, the way a man nails a hawk to a fence post to tell the smaller things whose land they are on. That night above the camp, there was a sound. A high thin buzz, there and gone. Paul the engineer said it was a drone. Everyone else said it was a bug, because a bug is a thing you can live with and a drone in that emptiness is not. And here is the thing Mara remembered afterward, and could not stop remembering. When the sound came, every head tipped back. Every face turned up to the dark to search for it, every face but one. Owen did not look up. Owen looked down at his own hands and then off into the trees. Low, the way you look at a thing you already know the shape of and do not need to find. He did not search the sky. He already knew what was in it, and there was a whistle in the trees long after dark. 2 notes, low, patient, from the ridge, and then an answer from the far side of the valley. The same 2 notes. June asked if it was an owl. Cole said yes, it was not an owl. Owls do not answer each other on schedule. Someone, I think it was Gus, mentioned forest pirates. He said it as a joke, the way you do. He had heard stories in the bars in Fairbanks about men who lived out past the last road, who ran things through the bush that no one wanted to see, who took what they wanted because there was no one for 100 miles to stop them. He laughed when he said it. Cole did not laugh. His face closed like a door, and Owen by the fire said something under his breath and a few words, and then stopped himself in the middle of them. Mara caught only the shape of it. An odd little phrase about the birch remembering said easy and low like a saying a man has heard 100 times. And then Owen seemed to hear himself and shut his mouth and looked around to see if anyone had caught it. Mara had caught it. She did not know then that it was a saying of the men in the trees, a thing the Birch Knives said among themselves, a phrase no tourist from Anchorage should ever have had in his mouth. She only knew it landed wrong, one more wrong note, and she added it to the pile she was building without a name. Cole told Gus quietly not to use that word out here. Then he checked the perimeter of the camp twice more than he needed to. And he slept, if he slept at all, with his boots on. It came at midday in a stretch of thick spruce where the trail dropped into a draw, and the group was strung out and looking at their feet. It was fast. That is the thing people never understand. They imagine a standoff, a warning, a chance. There was none. One moment there were 10 tired tourists and one guide complaining about their packs, and the next there were men among them. 6, then 8, then more coming out of the trees on both sides without a sound. Rifles up, moving like they had rehearsed it. Because they had nobody fought, there was nothing to fight with and no time to try. Gus put his hands up so fast he dropped his water bottle. Theo made a sound like a child. Dana grabbed Ben's arm hard enough to bruise it, and Ben put his body a half step in front of hers, which he did not decide to do. Which just happened, because that was who he was. The men worked in silence and in order. Phones first, then the 2 satellite messengers, then the GPS units, the cameras, and then methodically the medicine, the food, the fuel, the maps. They did not shout. They did not gloat. One of them, a big one, held a printed sheet and read names off it. Cole Barrett and then the clients one by one, correctly, before anyone had said a word. They knew the names. They knew the route. They knew the schedule. They knew the float plane pilot's rotation and when the next check-in was due. Somebody had told them everything. Cole understood in that moment what none of the others did. He looked at his own group, at the 10 faces he had led into the trees, and he knew that one of them had sold the rest. He did not know which, not yet. He only knew the shape of it, because he had done a version of it himself once long ago. And it had cost him his soul. They bound the 11 of them at the wrists and ran a rope between them so they could walk but not run, and they marched them off the trail, into country with no path, toward a place the maps did not show. The camp was a thing the outlaws had made out of ruins. Old logging ground, like I said. There had been a worksite there, decades gone. Concrete pads cracked and heaved by the frost. A pair of steel shipping containers, rust-streaked, hauled in on the old road God knows when and left. A long shed with half a roof. And the men had built into it, added tarps and plastic and stolen tents, strung wire in the trees, dug pits, set traps in a ring around the whole place, so that the forest itself became the fence. There were no walls to climb. There was just the dark, and the traps, and the men who knew where the traps were and where you were not. They put the hostages in the long shed. And it was there, on the second night of their captivity, that they met Victor Kane. I met him later. I will describe him the way I came to know him, because the first thing you learned about Victor was that he was not what you expected. And that was the worst thing about him. You expect a man like that to be loud, to rant, to wave a gun and make speeches. Victor did none of that. Victor was quiet. He was clean, even out there, always clean, and calm, and he spoke softly. So softly that you leaned in to hear him, and you hated yourself for leaning in, for giving him that. But you did it anyway. He did not hurt people to hurt them. He hurt people to learn them. And then he used what he learned. He was the most intelligent, frightening person I have ever been in a room with. And I have been in rooms with killers. He walked into that shed on the second night, and he looked at the 10 shivering tourists and the beaten guide, and he smiled a small, tired smile like a man greeting relatives at an airport. And he said he was sorry for the conditions and hoped they would not be together long. And somehow that was worse than any threat, because a threat tells you where the edge is, and Victor never showed you the edge until you were already over it. He recognized Cole. Of course he did. That was the whole point. He walked up to Cole, who was on his knees with a split lip, and he crouched to be level with him, and he said quietly that it had been a long time, and that he had been patient, and that patience was the only thing the forest ever taught anyone worth teaching. Cole did not answer. Cole had gone somewhere behind his own eyes. There was one small thing Mara saw that night, and she stored it with the others. Victor walked the length of the shed and looked at every one of them, held every gaze, learned every face but one. When he came to Owen, Victor's eyes slid past him and did not stop, the way your eyes slide past a man you have arranged not to know. It was nothing. It was less than nothing. But Mara had a pile of nothings by then, and this one went on top. Victor made Cole record the ransom message on one of the stolen phones, reading from a page Victor had written, with a rifle at the back of his neck. The amount, $1 million. The terms, 1 ranger alone. No aircraft, no police. No second man. Cole read it flat and dead. But at the end, in a voice so tired it sounded like nothing at all, he added a line that was not on Victor's page. He said, "The North Trail is lying." Victor let it go. He thought it was despair, a broken man's babble. He did not know that Cole had guided in that country long enough to have taught something to a ranger years back, over coffee at a trailhead, that when you tie survey tape in a granny knot instead of a clean one, it means the marked way is a trap. It means someone is watching the road they want you to take. Cole was talking to me. He was betting the last card he had that they would send me. Because I was the ranger who knew that country, and I was the one who could not say no. He was right about both. They found me 2 days later, at the district office at the end of a shift, with Rook asleep under my desk. The coordinator, a good man named Dawson, came to me himself instead of calling, which told me it was bad before he opened his mouth. He played me the message. I heard Cole's dead voice read the terms. I heard the last line, and the North Trail is lying, and my stomach dropped because I understood it. And understanding it meant this was not a simple ransom. This was a thing with layers, and Cole was warning me from inside it. The people upstairs did not want to send a ranger alone into the bush with $1 million. Of course they didn't. It broke every protocol there was, but the kidnappers had been specific and clever, and they had already demonstrated they knew everything about the group. There were negotiations for a day, and every one of them came back to the same wall. Aircraft and marksmen were staged far beyond the ridge. But out there, distance is not control. One wrong engine sound, one glint of glass, one radio transmission in the wrong pocket of air, and Victor had promised to kill a hostage before anyone could even cross the tree line. One ranger, alone, and they wanted a name. They had asked for me, by name. I did not understand that then. I thought it was because I knew the terrain. That was true. It was not the reason. The reason was Victor and what Victor was really after, and I would not learn it until I was on my knees in front of him. I said yes. There were 10 people out there and a guide I respected, and one of them was surely thinking right now in the cold that no one was coming. I could not be the reason no one came. Not again. They gave me the money in a hard case inside a soft pack. $1 million is heavier than you think and lighter than it should be for what it buys. And they put a tracker in the case hidden in the lining, a small thing that would ping a satellite. I told them it was a mistake. I told them these men had already found 2 satellite messengers and a GPS on 10 amateurs, and they would find a tracker on the one person they had specifically told to come clean. The people upstairs said it was non-negotiable. They needed eyes on the exchange. I carried that tracker in against my own judgment, and a young man named Theo Lane died for it, and I have never forgiven myself, and I never will. I am not asking you to. I am just telling you it happened and that I knew better and I did it anyway. I packed the rest myself, which was the only part I trusted. My rifle, an old bolt-action I had carried for years, a radio, a beacon, a medical kit better than anything Mara had. rations, fire, and Rook. I brought Rook because the term said one ranger and said nothing about a dog. Because he was the best tracker in the district, and because I was not going in there without him. I told myself I was bringing him to help. That was true. It is also true that I could not leave him, that I brought my last piece of family into a place I suspected was a trap, because I was too afraid to face it alone. I will carry that too. It turns out you always have room. Here is what you need to know about how Rook and I worked, because the whole night turns on it. He did not merely obey me. I want to be careful about that word because people hear it wrong. A trained dog obeys. Rook did more than that. Rook chose me, every day, freshly. The way you choose the person you love in the morning when you could have chosen to be tired of them. He would look at my hand for a signal, and then look at my face, and there was a decision in it. Always a decision. And the decision was always yes. He understood my hands. A flat palm meant stop. 2 fingers down meant seek. A fist meant come to me and be silent. He knew my whistles, 3 of them, one so soft it was more air than sound. That one meant danger and freeze. He knew my walk in the dark and my breathing when I slept. Other dogs spend themselves on nothing, on squirrels and shadows and their own excitement. Rook was economical. He held still until stillness was wrong, and then he moved exactly as much as the moment required and not 1 inch more. A plane dropped me at the same nameless lake where the tourists had started. The pilot did not shut the engine off. He looked at me like a man looking at someone already dead and being polite about it. Then he was gone and the silence came down. And it was me and Rook and $1 million. And black spruce going on forever in every direction. I found the group's trail easily. 10 people and a guide leave a road through that country. And then I started finding the other story, the one written over theirs. Boot prints that appeared out of nowhere on the flank of the trail, paralleled it a while, and vanished into moss that should have held them. Whoever made them knew how to walk where the ground does not remember. Branches broken deliberately at eye level, snapped and left hanging. Here's where we watched them, and on the second morning on a spruce beside the trail a strip of orange survey tape. Old Forest Service issue, tied around the trunk at chest height. It should have been a comfort, a trail marker. Except the knot was wrong. A clumsy granny knot, not the clean flat knot any crew ties by habit. I stood there with my hand on that tape, and I heard Cole's dead voice say, "The North Trail is lying," and I understood that the marked way ahead was the way they wanted me to go, and that meant the way they wanted me to go was where they were. Rook understood before I did. The way he always did. That afternoon he stopped. Just stopped in the trail and would not go forward and looked at me, and his hackles came up along his spine and a sound came out of him that was not a bark. A low, continuous thing from deep in his chest that I had heard maybe 3 times in 6 years, and every time it meant, not the country, men, and not good ones. The forest ahead had gone silent. No birds, the pocket of nothing. And under the spruce, faint, that same carved mark on a birch, 3 strokes in a curve, fresh cut, pale wood showing. I put my hand flat. Rook stopped making the sound. I put 2 fingers to my own lips and he went silent as snow. He had felt it before I had. He always felt it before I had. That was the whole arrangement of our lives. That he stood a half second ahead of me in the world, so that nothing could reach me without going through him first. I went on, toward the exchange point. The exchange point was an old bridge. There is a gorge in that country, Greywater Gorge, where a creek has cut down through rock into a slot maybe 40 feet deep, and the water at the bottom runs fast and gray and cold enough to stop your heart in minutes. A long time ago, the loggers threw a bridge across it, timber and cable to move equipment. The Forest Service condemned it decades back. It was still standing, more or less, sagging in the middle, the kind of structure that holds your weight right up until it doesn't. That is where they told me to bring the money. And that is where I stood, at the near end, at dusk, with the case at my feet and Rook pressed against my leg, waiting. They came out of the trees on the far side without a sound. 4 of them, then a 5th, rifles slung easy, men who had done this before and were not worried about the outcome. And behind them, walking slow in a clean coat that had no business being clean out there, came Victor Kane. He stopped at the far end of the bridge and looked at me across the sag of it, across the sound of the water, And he smiled that small, tired smile, and he said, "Good evening, Ranger Ward." As if we had an appointment, I told him I had the money. I told him I wanted to see the hostages before it crossed the bridge. Money for people, and then not a dollar until I saw them alive. Victor tilted his head like a man considering a reasonable request from a child. And he said gently that I still thought this was about money. I said the deal was the money for the hostages. He said the money was never the deal. The money was the reason I would come. The hostages were the reason I would come alone. And you, he said, are the deal. I went for my rifle. I was too slow and there were too many of them. And they had been on both sides of me the whole time. 2 men came out of the spruce behind me where I would have sworn nothing was, and a rifle barrel touched the base of my skull, cold, and a hand took my weapon. And it was over that fast. That is how it always is. Not a fight, a fact. They did not shoot Rook. That surprised me, and it was worse than being shot. A man moved to put him down, and Victor said no, quietly, and the man stopped. Victor looked at Rook a long moment. At the way Rook had gone still and low and was watching him with a killing patience, and Victor said the dog might be useful, that a trained tracker would find anything that ran, that they should keep him muzzled, tied, alive. They took the money. They took me. They took my dog. And they walked us across that condemned bridge in the last of the light, over water that would have been a kinder ending than what waited, and into the trees on the far side. Of the 10 people I had come to buy back, only one would walk out of that forest. And the one who saved my life was never on any list. They put me in the long shed with the others, and I saw all 10 tourists still alive, Cole among them, and it broke something in me that I have not fixed. They were cold, real cold, the kind that has moved into the bones and set up house that makes people small and slow and stupid. They had been out there days. The outlaws fed them just enough and warmed them just enough to keep them useful, and no more. Gus Holt had aged 10 years. Theo would not look at anyone. Dana and Ben sat pressed together, sharing heat. Paul was gray with the pain he still would not name. June had a folded letter open on her knee, reading it and rereading it in the last of the light. Lena was holding on by naming things quietly to herself. The plants, the birds, anything with an order to it. Wes had folded so far into himself he was almost not there, and I saw his hand go once to the pocket where the recorder was and stop. Because there was nothing to say to a little girl from a place like that, and Mara Quinn was moving among them, doing what little could be done, checking Paul's leg, keeping Theo talking, splitting her own ration. When she saw me brought in, bound and beaten, she understood in one look what it meant, that the ranger was captured, that the last card had been played and lost, and she decided not to let the others see her understand it. She kept moving. She kept being useful. She was, in that shed, the only warmth that was not a fire, and the fires were dying. Victor came to us that first night, and he began the thing he was truly good at, which was not violence. It was the slow murder of trust. He did not beat anyone. He was worse than that. He brought one blanket, a good wool blanket, warm, and he laid it on the ground in the middle of the shed, and he said it was a gift and there was only one, and we could decide among ourselves who would have it. Then he left. You cannot imagine what one blanket does to 10 freezing people. Or maybe you can, and that is worse. Gus said Theo should have it. He was youngest. Theo refused, ashamed. Someone said Paul for his hip, and Paul refused. And then everyone knew about the hip, and Paul hated that more than the cold. And then the blanket just sat there, and the cold worked on everyone, and slowly, without anyone deciding it, the blanket became a wound. Every hour it was not on your body was an hour someone else's body was warmer than yours. And you started to hate them a little, and hate yourself for hating them, and that is exactly what Victor wanted. And he had done it with a blanket. Without lifting a hand, the next day he fed one man in front of the others. He picked Wes, quiet Wes, and gave him a hot meal, steam coming off it, and made the rest watch. And when it was done, he took Wes aside and spoke to him low where no one could hear and brought him back. And now everyone wondered what Wes had said, what he had traded. And Wes could not defend himself because there was nothing to defend against. Only suspicion. And suspicion in a freezing shed grows like frost. Then Victor told them plainly that there was a traitor among them. He said one of them had sold the rest and that he would not say which, and because it was more interesting this way, and then he left them to it. I watched a group of decent, frightened people turn on each other over the next days, and it was the most efficient cruelty I have ever seen, and Victor never raised his voice once. They suspected Cole because Cole had a past he would not talk about, and because Victor seemed to know him. They suspected me. They suspected Wes because of the meal. They suspected Mara because she was calm, and calm reads as guilty to the terrified. They suspected each other for the smallest things, a look, a whisper, a portion of food, and through all of it, one man watched too carefully. I had spent a career reading the difference between a man lost and a man hiding. And Owen Price was hiding. He knew things. He referred once to the far camp, before anyone had said there was more than one camp. He flinched at a sound from the north edge a full second before the guard there called out. And his fear was always a half-beat late, a performance catching up to a script he already knew. I said nothing. You do not accuse a man in a cage full of frightened people. You wait and you watch. On the fourth night, Victor said the thing that has stayed in me longer than any wound. He came into the shed, after days of the blanket and the food and the cold and the suspicion, and he looked at all of them, at what he had made of them. And he said it softly, almost kindly, like a teacher giving a lesson he was fond of. He said, "People don't break when you hurt them. They break when they understand nobody is coming." Then he let it sit in the cold with us, and he left. And I watched it do its work on every face in that shed. Because it was true, or it felt true. And the difference between true and feels true does not matter at all when you are freezing in the dark, and the man who owns the dark has just told you the one thing you were trying not to know. Remember that Victor said that. It matters at the end. The first of them died that same night, and it was Gus. I want you to see one thing first. That evening in the last light, they let us stand at the shed door under guard for air, and I watched Gus Holt look at the tree line. Just look at it. There was no fence out there. No wire, no wall, nothing but trees. And I watched a man who had spent his whole life fixing things with his hands stare at that open ground and slowly understand that the openness was the cage. That the forest itself had been made into the wall. I watched him refuse to believe it. He was a doer, a fixer. Helplessness was killing him faster than the cold. He decided, and without telling anyone, that he was going to run. That he was going to slip out in the dark and get help, because he could not sit and wait to die. And I know he thought he was doing something brave. He waited until the deepest part of the night, and he worked his way out of the shed while the guard was at the far end, and he ran for the trees. I woke to Rook's warning, the low sound from where they had him tied outside. Then I heard Gus running, the heavy, careless steps of an old man in the dark on ground he did not know. Then the flashlights came on, 3 of them, 4, swinging through the spruce, and the men moving, not hurrying, because they did not need to hurry, because they had built the forest into a cage and Gus was running deeper into it, and then Gus screamed. I did not see it. None of us saw it. That is the horror of that place. You heard everything and saw nothing, and your mind did the rest, and your mind is worse than any eye. The scream was short. Then it was a different sound. Then it stopped. And the flashlights gathered in one spot in the trees and stayed there a while. And then they came back, and Gus did not. They had set a cable snare out there, the kind that does not let go. And Gus had run in the dark into a thing that a man who knew where it was would have stepped around in his sleep. In the morning, they let us out to the edge of the clearing, under guard, and they let us see just enough. They wanted us to see it. The snare hung there, sprung. The cable, dark and stiff and caught in it, still laced, was one of Gus's boots. Just the one. From the snare into the trees there was a drag mark, a long dark furrow through the frost and the moss, where something heavy had been pulled away in the night. And at the near end of it, where the worst of it had happened, scattered across the moss and the thin snow, bright and small and terrible, were Gus's peppermints. The whole handful of them, spilled from his coat, red and white and cheerful, scattered like a child had dropped a bag of candy in the woods, sitting there in the dark blood. I have never in my life seen anything as obscene as those bright little candies in that place, because they were kind, and Gus had been kind, and the forest does not care about kind, and the body was gone. That was the last cruelty of it, and the worst. They had dragged him off into the black so that there was no man to grieve over, no shape to cover, nothing to bury. Just a boot and a wire and a drag mark and a scatter of peppermints. And the absence of him, which was somehow more than any body would have been, because a body is a fact, and an absence is a question that never stops being asked. Lena was sick in the moss. Theo would not stop shaking. Mara held June while she cried, and June had one of the children's letters crushed in her fist, and Victor came and looked at us with something almost like disappointment, and said he had told us the forest was the wall, and now we knew he had not been speaking figuratively. After Gus, they stopped talking about escape. After Gus, they started dying inside, which is what Victor wanted. Theo died on the 5th day, and Theo's death is the one I own. They found the tracker. I knew they would. Someone went through the money case a second time more carefully and pried up the lining, and found the small, clean piece of technology that did not belong, and they brought it to Victor. He did not explode. I have told you that about him. He held the tracker in his palm, and he looked at it, and he looked at me, and he understood the whole shape of it in a second, that the authorities had tried to deceive him, that there were eyes he had not accounted for, that the ranger had carried a lie into his forest, and then he did the thing I did not expect. The thing that was worse than anger. He gathered the hostages and brought them close, and he held up the tracker so they could all see it. And he turned to me, and in that soft voice he said, "Tell them what you brought in with the money, Ranger." He did not say it to me. He said it about me, to them. He wanted them to hear it from my mouth. He wanted me to explain to 10 freezing hostages that the rescue, the one they had been praying for, the ranger and the money and the hope, had come into that forest carrying the very thing that was about to get one of them killed. I did not say anything. I want to tell you I made a speech, that I found some words that made it better. There were no words that made it better. Anything I said would have been an excuse, and they did not deserve an excuse. They deserved the truth. And the truth was that I had known it was a mistake and carried it anyway. So I said nothing, and my silence was the truth. And it was the most honest and most useless thing I have ever done, and Theo understood. That is the part that finished me. Theo, 24, who laughed too loud, looked at the tracker in Victor's hand, and then he looked at me. Slow. And I watched him understand it, watched it move across his young face, that the help had brought the harm. That hope had been the thing carrying the knife. He did not look angry. That would have been easier. He looked like a boy who had just learned something about the world that no one should have to learn. And he looked at me while he learned it, and I held his eyes. Because I owed him that. At least I owed him not to look away. Victor said a message needed to be sent to the people watching through their little tracker, to let them know what happened when the terms were broken. And he chose Theo, the youngest, maybe because Theo's death would hurt the rest of us the most. Victor's cruelty was never wasteful. They took him out to the edge of the camp near the old trail marker where the tracker had been reporting, so the body would be found where the eyes were looking. Theo did not fight. He was too far gone. He asked for his mother once, and then he did not say anything else. And it was quick, and it was cold, and it was the worst thing I have ever heard, because I heard it and did not see it, and my mind will not stop finishing the picture. They left him there by the marker, for the eyes to find a message. "This is what your tracker bought you," I broke a little. And Mara, who had every right to hate me, came to me in the dark of the shed and put her hand on my arm and said low that Victor was going to send a message with or without a tracker, that he would have killed someone anyway, and she was probably right, and it did not help. And I loved her a little for trying. That night I decided I was going to get these people out or die trying, and the first thing I had to do was get free. And the only friend I had who could help me was tied to a post 40 feet away with a muzzle on. Here's a thing about Rook that I understood only later, when I put it all together. Through all those days tied to his post, Rook was not despairing and he was not idle. He was working him in the only way left to him. He was watching. I know it the way I know all the true things about him from years of reading him. He watched the guards. He learned which one drank and slept at the far end and which one paced. Learned the rhythm of the watch. Learned the hour the camp went slack. He was doing what he had done on 100 searches, gathering the ground, waiting for the moment, holding still until stillness was wrong. He was a working dog on the worst job of his life, and he was waiting for me to give the signal, because he had decided, the way he decided everything, that we were not finished. I waited until the deep, cold hour when the guard on my container settled against the far wall and his chin dropped. The hour Rook already knew was coming. And then I made the sound, the softest of my whistles and more breath than tone. Our danger and come signal. Rook's head came up and then slow, so quiet, and he began to work. They had muzzled him and he could not get it off, but he could still use his jaws a little, and he had spent days working the knot on his tie-out with his teeth in the hours no one watched, loosening it a thread at a time, and now with me calling he finished it, and he was loose, he did not run. That was the discipline. That was the choosing. A dog runs. Rook came to me low to the ground, belly almost in the dirt, silent as fog. And he lay down against the gap under the container door, and I felt his breath through the rust, and I could have wept. I needed a blade. My hands were behind me, wired, useless. But there was a broken piece of steel strapping band in the dirt near the container, sharp along one edge, and Rook could smell the fresh cut where a guard had snapped it days before. I gave him the seek signal in a whisper, and he went and found it and dragged it in his teeth past the muzzle and pushed it through the gap under the door, to where my bound hands could reach it. It took most of an hour. The guard stirred twice. The first time I froze and Rook froze, pressed to the door, not breathing, and the guard resettled. The second time I nearly dropped the band, my numb fingers losing it, and I caught it against my own wrist and felt it cut me and did not make a sound. And Rook made no sound either. And we waited, two animals in the dark who had learned each other so well that we could be still together. As one thing, while a man decided whether to look, he did not look. I sawed through the wire a strand at a time, until my hands came free and the blood came back into them like fire. I worked the door pin loose, and I got out. And for one breath, one whole breath, I stood free in the dark with my dog against my leg, and the camp asleep, and the stars out cold and clean above the spruce, and nothing in the world moved. I put my forehead to his and held his muzzle in both hands and told him with my hands, without a sound, that he was the best there ever was. And then I took the muzzle off, and he did not bark. He just leaned his whole weight into me for 1 second. And then he turned to face the dark, ready to work. I went to free Cole. Cole told me his confession while we worked in whispers, and I will give you the shape of it now, and the whole of it when we reach the place it was waiting for us. Years back, before he was the guide who brought people home, Cole had been younger and poorer and less careful, and he had guided a group of hard men through this country the off-map way, and learned too late what those men moved along the trails he showed them. It was not goods, he ran. He changed everything. He became the careful guide, the one who tied his knots clean, the one who brought people home, and he built a good clean life on top of the worst thing he had ever done. The way you build a cabin on top of a grave and try not to think about what is under the floor. Victor had led those men then. Victor led them now. And Victor had spent years being patient, because patience was the only thing the forest ever taught anyone worth teaching. He didn't come back for the money. Cole whispered. He needs us, both of us. There's a door up the old service road that he can't open, and you and I are the only 2 keys left alive. I did not understand yet. I would. On my knees at dawn, I would. We got into the shed. Mara was awake. She was always awake. And she understood in a second and started waking the others silently. Cole and I cut the ties. Donna and Ben. Paul, who gripped my arm and said thank you, and I told him to save it. June, folding her letter away into its bag. Lena. Wes, whose hand went again to the recorder in his pocket. And Owen. Owen was still there. Still tied. Discarded by Victor, but not yet dead. And he saw us freeing the others, and he begged us to free him too. And I looked at him, and I looked at Cole, and God help me, we cut his ties. Because whatever he was, I was not going to walk out of a burning building and leave a man tied up in it. I told myself it was mercy. But before we moved, the reckoning came, quiet and fast. And it was Mara who brought it. As Owen's hands came free, he was already talking, already promising he would keep up. And Mara looked at him in the dark and said the thing she had been building toward for days without knowing it. She said, "You asked about the North Trail before Cole ever said it. Just that." And Dana beside her, low and shaking, "You didn't look up at the drone. You looked away, and it landed on Owen like a weight. All of it, all the small wrong notes. And I watched him understand that they had seen it, that it had been visible the whole time, that he had been walking through the middle of them wearing his betrayal like a coat, and only the terror had kept them from reading it. He did not deny it. There was no time and no point. He just went pale and we moved. We got them out of the shed and into the trees on the side away from the traps, the side I had watched the guards not watch. And for 100 yards, for 200 it was working. 10 shapes and a dog, flowing through the black spruce away from the camp. And I let myself believe it was Owen who broke it. Of course it was. In the dark, in the fear, he panicked, or he calculated, I will never know which. And he thought maybe there was still a deal to be had. Maybe if he ran back and warned them, they would take him after all. And he turned and blundered back toward the camp, calling out. And a guard woke, and the camp came alive, and the dark filled with light and shouting and the flat cracks of rifles. And the chase began. It went on for hours, and I cannot give you all of it because I did not see all of it. That is the nature of a chase in the dark in that country. You see pieces. You lose people. You count, and the number is wrong. We ran downhill, because down was away and down was toward the river and the old road, with headlamps swinging behind us and the shouts of men who knew the ground, and rifles cracking at shapes, and Rook ranged ahead and behind, warning, guiding, herding the slow ones. A dark shape appearing at my knee and gone again, keeping us together as long as together was possible. The first of theirs died early, and I want you to hear it happen the way I heard it. A fast one, a man named Tate, was gaining on us in the fog, close enough that I could hear his breath, and then the breath became a shout, and the shout became a sound of cable and a crash of brush. He had run full speed into a snare his own people had set. One of the ring of traps they had all been warned about and that he, in the heat of the chase, forgot. I did not slow down, and I felt nothing, and I have wondered since whether that nothing was strength or the beginning of becoming like them. Then I looked back and counted 9. Then I ran and pulled Paul over a rock and looked back and counted 8, and there had been no scream. No shot, nothing, just one fewer shape in the fog, one fewer person, gone, as if the forest had simply closed a hand. Wes Caldwell was the first of ours to vanish, and I never knew how. He was there, and then the space where he had been was full of fog. Weeks later, searchers found his recorder, cracked, half sunk in the moss, a long way from where any of us had gone. It still turned on, and there was one last file on it started that night, and it was 4 seconds long. It was Wes's voice, low and warm, the way it only ever was for her, saying, "Hi, baby," and then nothing. Just, "Hi, baby," and the sound of the forest, and the file ended. He had stopped to say goodnight to his daughter in the middle of running for his life. Or he had said it while something came, and I have never let myself decide which. They gave the recorder to his little girl's mother, and I hope to God she never plays it, and I know she plays it every night. June Hart went next, or I think she was next. The order is not clean in my memory. She fell behind helping Lena. And there was a light in the fog off to the side, low, moving, and a voice, and I would have sworn it was calling her name in Cole's voice. "Come this way, over here." And it was not Cole's voice, because Cole was in front of me, and by the time I understood that, the light and the voice were gone, and so was June. All they ever found of her was one of the children's letters, soaked and half frozen into the mud at the edge of a snare, the round third-grade printing run and blurred by the water, still readable in places. A child telling their teacher to have fun and come back safe. She had it out at the end. Running, terrified she had taken it out to read it the way she always did when she was afraid. And the forest took her and left the letter in the mud, and I cannot think about that letter without having to stop whatever I am doing. Somewhere in that same stretch of dark, 2 of theirs met each other in a thicket, each shooting at shapes, each taking the other for us, and one of them fired and killed his own man, a man named Renner. I heard the shot, and then I heard the other one realize what he had done, a sound a man makes only once in his life. Lena Park screamed once far off to the left where none of us had gone. And the scream stopped too quickly, the way a scream stops when a hand is put over it. When they searched afterward, they found the place, and it was a stand of the same low round-leafed plants she had named for Theo on the first night. The ones she had crouched over and loved, and at the edge of the water there was a single boot, laced, upright, set on the bank as if she had taken it off to wade. She had told us the forest was not cruel, only indifferent. I have thought about that 1,000 times, and I do not know any more if she was right. Indifferent would have been a mercy. Indifferent does not set a boot upright on a bank. Dana and Ben Frost stayed together the way they always had. They were behind me at the broken logging span over the gorge. I saw them. I swear I saw them cross onto it holding hands, her in his gloves. And I was ahead pulling Paul, and there was a crack that might have been a rifle or might have been old timber. And when I looked back, the middle of the span was gone and the fog was closing and there was no one on it and no sound from the gorge. They never found Dana or Ben. Not a thread. Not a bone. And I have decided for my own sake to believe they went into that cold water together, holding on, because that is how they did everything, and because the alternative is unbearable. Paul Brody was the last of them to go. And Paul, I nearly saved. I had him by the arm the whole way, dragging him on that ruined hip, and he was slowing, and he knew he was slowing. And near the end, on a steep pitch above the river with lights coming, he stopped, and he took his arm out of my hand. He said he was done, that the hip was finished, that he was not going to be the reason anyone else died. He had hidden that hip for a week so he would not ruin the trip, and now he gave it up out loud finally, as a reason to be left behind. And he pushed me, hard, and I lost my grip and stumbled down the slope, and when I climbed back, Paul was gone. No fall, no shot, no cry, gone. And where he had been standing there was his cracked phone in the moss, screen faintly glowing, recording, and there was nothing on it but fog, and the sound of my own voice calling his name. We reached the old service road at last, and we were down to 4. Cole and Mara and me and Rook. One of theirs, a big man named Sloan, ran us to ground at the top of the grade where the road ran along the lip of a ravine, and he caught Cole and they fought. 2 big tired men on wet rock in the dark. No guns anymore, just hands and weight and the will to live. And it went to the edge, and Cole got a grip and turned him, and Sloan went over into the dark, and Cole stayed there at the edge, on his knees, breathing like a bellows, looking down into a black he could not see the bottom of, and neither of us said anything, because we both knew there was one of them left, and it was the only one that had ever really mattered. We reached the ranger station near dawn, the 4 of us, and it was there that the last of it happened. Station 9 was a Forest Service outpost from another era. A squat log and plank building on a rise above the river, condemned and abandoned when the district reorganized and the road was let go. I had been there once as a young ranger. I knew the door. I knew the old Forest Service padlock, and I knew that every station in the district had used the same key pattern in those years, and that pattern lived in my head, where Victor could not reach it. And standing at that door, I finally understood the whole of it. Why the ransom terms had named me. Why Victor had kept Cole alive. Why any of this. Cole gave me the rest of his confession there in full, while I worked the lock, the part he had carried longer than I had carried Eddie. The men he had guided all those years ago had moved people through this country. People who went in along the trails Cole showed them and did not come out. And an old ranger, dead now, had figured out a piece of it and had kept a record, and had hidden it in the station where he worked, and had died before he could do anything with it. And the record had sat there locked away, a bomb with a slow fuse. Victor believed that record could destroy him, and to reach it he needed 2 things he could not buy: a guide who knew the off-map route to a road that no longer existed, and a ranger who could open a Forest Service lock. He needed Cole, who had guided him once. And he needed me. That is why they asked for me by name, not because I knew the terrain, because I could open the one door Victor could not. I got the door open and we went in and we found it. And it was worse and larger than Cole had guessed. There was a ledger. A real one, a bound book gone soft with damp. And in it, in the careful hand of a dead ranger, were names and dates and dollar amounts going back many years. Payments to men and offices whose names I recognized from letterheads. Notations of shipments and of people, with dates of entry into that country and no date of exit. A tally of the missing that no one had ever reported missing, because no one had ever known they were there. There were photographs, old trail camera images, a few faded instant photos, men at loading points, vehicles, faces, and some of the faces were a young Victor Kane, and there was a page with Cole's name on it, from years ago. The guide who had shown the men the trails, paid such and such on such and such a date. His guilt, written down in a dead man's hand sitting in a locked building in the woods. Waiting. Cole read his own name and he did not flinch. He had stopped running from it a long time before in his heart. He looked at me and said, "Now you know." And I said I already knew. That he had told me. And that the man who told me was not the man in the ledger. It was the only forgiveness anyone ever offered Cole Barrett in his life. And it came from a ranger in a rotting outpost at dawn. And it was not enough, but it was what I had. Owen Price found us at the station. And the last time I saw him, he was doing exactly what he had done from the beginning, trying to make a deal. He had not vanished with the others. Somehow, in the chaos, he had survived the night and he came up the service road behind us. And Victor was behind him. And Owen, seeing Victor, made his last calculation. He ran to him. He put himself between Victor and us and he started talking fast, the old song. That he could still help. That he had led Victor right to the ledger. That surely now there was a deal. Surely now he had earned his place. Victor looked at him the way you look at a thing stuck to your boot. He did not even answer with words. He had used Owen for everything Owen was worth. And a man who sells his friends is a man who will sell you. And Victor knew it better than anyone, because Victor was the same kind of man. What happened next was quick and quiet, and the trees were between us before I saw the end of it. Owen made one sound, not a scream exactly, more like a man realizing the last door had closed. Then Victor stepped back into sight, alone. Owen Price had traded 10 lives for a promise, and in the end he got exactly the value of that promise. Nothing. The message of it was so plain that Victor did not need to say it. But he was Victor, so he said it anyway, softly, to no one. A man who sells others is always sold first. They pulled us out that morning, Mara, Cole, me, alive. The teams that came too late did what teams do, dogs and drones and men on foot for weeks, over the whole country. They recovered part of the money waterlogged and scattered. And they recovered the ledger and the photographs, and it broke open cases that reached into offices far from any forest, and men who had been comfortable for a long time stopped being comfortable. That is the one clean thing that came out of it. And it was not worth what it cost. Because nothing is. Without Victor, without the ledger, and without the roots Cole had once given them, the Birch Knives were finished as a thing with a spine. 2 confirmed dead, Gus and Theo, and 7 never found. Not the people. Only the things. A cracked recorder with 4 seconds of a father's voice, a child's letter frozen into the mud, a boot upright on a bank among the plants Lena had loved, a phone recording fog, a man's glove frozen into the ice of a creek, a man's glove sized for a woman's small hand somewhere the water took her. Belongings arranged sometimes too neatly, laid out by the country like offerings, or like a message in a language I could read the letters of but not the words. Owen Price was one of the 7. I have never known whether to count him with the victims or with the things the forest decided to keep. Mara wrote about it eventually, years later, because that is what she was. A person who made hard things into words so the rest of us could hold them. She wrote it true, and she left out the parts she promised me she would leave out. The voice in the fog, the boot on the bank. Because those parts do not help anyone. She is alive. We do not talk often. We do not have to. There are people you are bound to by a night, and you do not need to keep proving it. Cole went to the authorities on his own, after, and told them what he had done all those years ago, and took what came, which was less than he thought he deserved and more than I thought he did. He is a guide again in a different country now, far from that forest, and he brings people home. I think that is the only penance available to a man like Cole. To keep bringing people home, one at a time, for the rest of his life and never balance the book, and know it. And me, I left the service not long after. I could not go into the country and read the ground and find the lost anymore, because the ground had shown me its other face, the one that keeps what it takes, and I could not unsee it. I buried Rook near Station 9 under a black spruce on the rise above the river, in the one clean, quiet spot in all that country. And I set a stone, and I went back to the world. I did not go back to the grave for a long time. I could not. But months later, in the deep of the following winter, I made myself go, on foot, up the old service road to the spruce and the stone, to sit with him, because he had never once left me alone in the dark, and I could not stand that I had left him alone under the snow. And when I got there on top of the fresh snow near Rook's grave, there was something. It was small, and it was placed, not dropped, placed, sat upright and deliberate in the snow at the foot of the stone, and it did not belong to me, and it did not belong to Rook. It was a thing that had belonged to one of the 7. I knew it, I had seen it on them, in the shed, in the firelight, in the cold. A small, ordinary, personal thing that a person carries, and there is no way it should have been there. And in the snow beside it there was a single footprint, not a trail. Not a set of tracks coming up the road and going back down, not 2 feet, not a stride. Nothing leading in and nothing leading out. One footprint alone in the fresh, unbroken snow beside my dog's grave. As if someone had stood there once in that one spot and set the thing down, and then not walked away. Because to walk away you leave more than one print, and there was only one. I have never told anyone what the object was. I never will. And I have never had an explanation for the footprint, and I have stopped looking for one, because some things you explain only to have them explain themselves back to you, and I do not want that. I stood there a long time in the cold, in the enormous silence, whether it was one of the men who got away, coming back for a reason I could not guess, whether it was one of the 7, alive out there still, unable to come home and unwilling to be forgotten, or whether it was the thing I felt in the fog that night, the thing that called June's name in a stolen voice and set a boot upright on a bank. I put the object in my pocket. I sat with Rook, and when I walked back down the service road I did not look behind me, because I had learned in that forest that there are things it is better not to look at directly. And one of them had just told me, in the only language it had, that Victor Kane was never the only thing in those trees that knew how to take people, and that it knew where I had buried the one soul I had left, and that it had stood there once, without walking, and it had wanted me to know. I moved away after that, far away to flat country, a place with fences and streetlights and neighbors where the rules we make in warm rooms still mostly hold, where the dark ends at the edge of the yard. I have a good enough life. I am telling you this from it, but some nights, when the wind comes up out of the north and the snow starts, and the streetlight buzzes and the neighborhood goes still, I put my hand down beside my chair, out of an old habit, to a head that is not there, that has not been there for years, and I hear that country calling my name in a stolen voice, and I know, the way you know a thing in your body before your mind agrees, that if I ever go back into those trees the forest is still counting, and it is not finished. And there is a place at the foot of a spruce where it has already stood once without walking. I do not go back into the trees. That is the confession, the money, the 10, the 2 confirmed dead, the 7 gone, Victor wrong in the snow, Owen sold as he had sold, Cole's name in a dead man's book, Mara's hands over mine, the object at Rook's grave beside the single print I will never explain, and Rook, above all of it, and underneath all of it, and left standing when everything else fell. Rook, who never lied, who never doubted, who never left, who chose me every day for 6 years, and chose me one last time in the half-second it took to put his body in front of a bullet, and who used the last of himself to put his head on my hand and move his tail once and let me tell him he had gotten me home. He did get me home. That is the terrible arithmetic of it. He got me home, and the price of my home was him, and I have lived every day since inside a house he bought me and never got to enter. You got me home, boy. I am home. I wish to God you were here to see it.